Hello, colleagues. Firstly, thank you for coming on to this call. Well done for coming on to this call and allowing yourself that time to stop, to reflect, to top yourself up, and to consider your own well-being at this intense time. But maybe in moments of intensity is absolutely the right time for you to stop, pause, think, consider about where you're at, you as a human being that's trying to do your best in these very challenging circumstances that we find ourselves in at this time. As you can see on the screen, hopefully, my name is David Gumbrell. I'm one of you, as in I was a head teacher for 7 years in a junior school in Surrey, and very much enjoyed my time as a head teacher. But I can empathise and sympathise with the challenges of this role. And much of what I'm saying today is focused around those experiences, trying to empathise and potentially sympathise with the positions that you find yourselves in, but also celebrating the good things that are headship. And there are many of those. We just need to remind ourselves about what those things are. And then since headship, I've been writing and presenting on the theme of well-being and resilience. And it's something that I'm passionate about, as you'll tell, as I move through the slides. I don't know whether any of you have been on the previous calls or the previous webinars. I hope you have, but please do catch up with them if you want to. But I very much want to be interactive with you, colleagues. And if you come onto the chat box, then I will pause what I'm saying, or pause at the right times in what I'm saying. And then hopefully that can A, answer your questions, but B, just make it more of a dialogue rather than a monologue. And we would all enjoy that, I'm sure. And it will save my voice as well in little pauses and moments. I won't use your name, so you can feel safe that I'm not going to name and shame you. I will just read out a summary of what you're saying and then try to respond to that as best I can. So this is the third of four, and this is the theme of emotional well-being. For many of us, it's become a theme, hasn't it? And we understand what it means to some degree. But what I want us to think about this morning is the idea that I don't want it to just be a phrase. What I'm trying to get you to realize is that emotional well-being is about action. It's about doing something. It's not about laminating it and putting it up on the wall. It's not about putting up a motivational quote in the staff room or a motivational quote in your office. It is about actions. It is about doing something. And this is where I said to you at the beginning, well done for making sure that making sure that you give yourself the time to come onto this call and you give yourself the time to stop. So turn off those notifications, turn off those emails. Now you've committed to this call, genuinely commit to this call and don't allow yourself to be distracted. Just relax into it and allow me to take you through these important reflections. For some, immediately when we see Samaritans, we may go, oh, but this mental health, that's really, there may be a reaction to the fact that we can see Samaritans. But actually, on many spectrums, we're all somewhere on those spectrums, aren't we? We all have mental health. Whether we pretend that we have or we haven't, we have. And we know that because we are human beings. I am, you are, we are, and therefore we all have mental health. We've got to deal with this. We've got to deal with our heads. And sometimes our heads confuse us and challenge us in our thinking, challenge us in filtering out our experiences and those perceptions of those experiences that we feel. But when I was doing some research for this webinar, colleagues, I really like this key message that they were trying to convey. Emotional health is about how we think and feel. Initially, I was like, yeah, absolutely, I get that. But it's also, I think, about how we think we feel, as in we have an opportunity to consider how we feel. We almost have a filter in front of us that allows us to take in information, take in our experiences, and our perception of those experiences is very much filtered by our well-being. When we're feeling good, colleagues, we can filter it in a very different way to when we're feeling vulnerable and not okay. It is about our sense of well-being. So it's how we're sensing how we're doing, and that can ebb and flow and change over time. It is our ability to cope with life events, and life is tough right now. Being a head or a leader in a school is a difficult situation to cope with. Therefore, our sense of well-being is going to change and alter and shape as a result of that. Arguably, we need to take more time than we previously did to top ourselves up, because of the leaky bucket of which we hold. And by that, I mean the intensity of the things that are going on around us mean that we need to top ourselves up more than previously we did by looking after ourselves in a basic need requirement, but also beyond that, to get ourselves to, rather than being in deficit, that we are in surplus. I think that they're right in saying that we need to acknowledge our own emotions, but I would take that further again, and I would suggest that many of you are able to acknowledge your emotions, but then don't take that to the next stage, which is to acknowledge and then act on your own emotions. That, for me, was the greatest challenge of all, was to recognize it, but then to act on it, to then give it the priority, to then allow it the space, to allow it the time to nurture myself at the time when I needed nurturing, or to celebrate myself when I felt I was worthy of celebration, as well as acknowledging that I was feeling vulnerable and what did I need to move myself forwards in terms of feeling less vulnerable. Crucially, colleagues, it says it doesn't mean being happy all of the time. Emotional health is not that we are the smiling, happy bunnies all of the time. This is inauthentic in my view. I used to think that I had to be this swan, an emotional swan, calm on the surface and turbulent underneath. But I think that if we want to be authentic, and surely most of us do, then I think that we need to be human. And in order to be human, I think that we can't be happy all of the time. We need to recognize when we're not. And I know that my staff at the time were very comfortable with me not being happy all of the time. They recognized that I couldn't be and were supportive when I couldn't. So hopefully that's of interest to you and got yourself starting to warm up to the webinar and the ideas that we're sharing. Thank you for those who've come on to chat, and we can certainly talk about the previous webinars, potentially at the end or just through the dialogue of the chat box, but it would be great for colleagues that weren't able to attend the previous lectures to think about the other elements of well-being that we need to consider. Has anybody seen this film? Anybody want the glory of coming in the chat box and claiming that they've watched this children's video? I mean, we call it a children's video, but I'm not sure it's a children's video. I think adults should watch it too. The film is, oh, does anyone want, I'll just leave a moment for someone to claim the glory in the chat box. Ah, thank you. So our hosts have very kindly put out that Inside Out, and someone has verified the fact that it's a brilliant film. I think it's a brilliant film on many levels. I think it recognizes that we all have emotions and that we can all have voices, characters inside of our heads, making us doubt at times, making us angry at times, making us joyful at times. And we need to recognize these moments. Sadness, of course. Fearful, absolutely. I can name many, many, many occasions during my headship where I was fearful of what might come as a result of my actions or my decisions, result of what the reaction was going to be from other colleagues. So I think that this is a good idea to explore this idea further, and just to get you to reflect back and think about what potentially you could have learned from previous scenarios, now that you're giving yourself the time and the consideration to think about you in your context, in your situation, and you know that best. I think the swan analogy is rather too present, isn't it? I agree, colleagues. I think that we do need to try to be upbeat and positive when we can. But I think explicitly recognizing when we're not will allow us to feel authentic and to present ourselves as authentic. So for those of you who are not aware of the film, and therefore those characters mean very little to you, let's just expand it out slightly further. So psychology, this is actual real psychology playing out here. In a simplistic level, like, you know, we only have 7 colors in the rainbow idea, we do have 5 main emotions that are flooding through our systems: sadness, joy, fear, disgust, anger. And if you go on Twitter, if you go on social media, you will find all of these prevalent in any conversation, any dialogue, any flow going through any human interaction. In any school at any one time, there will be people in all of these categories all of the time, because we are all human beings just collectively in one space. And that can bring its own challenges as well as its own delights, as I'm sure you are all aware of. But let's just consider some of these for ourselves and take this time to reflect in part about our situation, taking it from just recognizing anger as an emotion, which is some form of detachment from ascribing anything to ourselves, which is good, but it's only base 1. But in order to get us to base 2, we have to try and take that further. So just scroll back, not possibly for some of you, unfortunately, not too far back, because you may well have already felt anger in the course of the first few hours of your working day. But think back to a moment where you felt anger, maybe not anger with a capital A and go to the extreme, but maybe something where anger took over. So I've got a very clear image in my head when I was deeply frustrated about a situation that I found myself in, and I felt trapped, and I felt as if I couldn't get out of that trap, psychological trap, and I got angry. I was cross. I was physically angry with the situation that I found myself in. But this is not about me. This is about you. So take this moment to stop and to consider that kind of angry with a small a, angry, when you last felt it. But then taking that idea forwards, what I find quite cathartic and quite useful, and therefore I think that it's worthy of your time, and I'm conscious of the fact that your time is precious, so I'm only giving you things that I do for myself and think you are worthy of our time, and my time is included within that. But think back to the cause of it. What was it that built it up? Because it is unlikely that it came out of nowhere. I used to think that it came out of nowhere, but now I know that it doesn't. It gradually builds up, and if we don't tackle it early, it builds and builds and builds. But for you, what caused it? And then importantly, what I like to do is I like to think about the resolution of it. Because once the emotions have calmed, once the situation has been fixed, then we can then think back to, well, how did that happen? It may be that just time resolved itself. In time, it resolved itself. But if we think about that for any length of time, what we realize is that time dampened down our emotion because we gradually got it back into perspective. There could be a whole raft of things as to how we've achieved it. But again, this is about you and not about me. And then importantly, at the end there, colleagues, how would you have resolved it differently, potentially, in hindsight? And I think that we can learn about these things, but we just need the time to do it. We talk about being a reflective practitioner, and again, it's become a very big word in education. But we can't reflect if we don't give ourselves time to do that action. We can't reflect if we don't give ourselves that pause moment within the busy day, within the busy timetable, and close that office door and really take that time. Where am I? Where am I? Why am I feeling like this? And where do I need to go next in order to help to find that resolution? Hopefully going through that process not only was cathartic in terms of just this one situation, but can help to structure what goes on in my processing factory when I'm managing and dealing with my own human emotions, and it can help and support you as you move further forwards. Because again, this is not just kind of one-off webinar where I disappear and you disappear and nothing happens. I'm trying to give you structures and processes and thought patterns that allow you to move yourself forwards from this point on. Again, I think it's useful to dig deeper into why we feel the way we feel. And Mind are a fantastic mental health charity, and potentially they can offer us some help in understanding what's going on. They describe anger as not necessarily a bad emotion. And I think sometimes we can feel guilty when we're being angry. But sometimes I agree with Mind, and when they're saying that it can be quite a useful, it can be a useful emotion. Yes, I would prefer to catch it early. Yes, I would prefer to catch it when it was angry with a small a. But I think even angry with a small a can help us to identify problems. It can help us to things that are hurting us. But we can only catch these when we stop and think about them when they're building just gradually. And this goes back to the idea that we need to sense where it's going wrong. We need to sense our own bodies. We need to sense our own feeling. We need to know ourselves well. And we need to act on it, which is the caveat on everything I'm going to be saying today. It can motivate us to create change. I certainly made a change as a result of my angry moment, where I learned from that, and I now realized how it happened, and I've understood it now. So I'm going to do my best to negotiate round it next time, because I know that I'm going to be in similar scenarios, because inevitably it's part of my role. So I have to be in those scenarios, but I need to manage it and couch it in a better way next time. It can, as it says there on that third bullet point, help us to stay safe. Now, this can be physical safety, or as we were going to talk about later, about psychological safety. And I think this is missing in a lot of what we're trying to do in terms of COVID catch-up. We can catch up academically. Yes, I can see the benefits of doing that. But if we don't have psychological safety, feeling safe in our minds, then we're not ready to learn. We're not ready to move on. We're not ready to get the job done, whatever that job may be for the different people in that space. We're going to come back to psychological safety, but I think for the moment, staying safe can sometimes be helpful if we are alert to our emotions, and when we are alert to doing something about it quickly. So have a little think about how you can catch yourself when you're angry with a small a. Or maybe that could even become a trending phrase. That would be a good thing, wouldn't it? So now we've got one model, we can then we can roll that model through, and we can just consider some other emotions. Not all of them, we haven't got time to do them all, but just we're going to do 3, and this is the second of those 3. Let's go back to a moment when you last felt fearful. There must be many. So again, capital F, but let's go for a small f, fearful. When was that small f fearful moment for you that you can consider, you immediately jumped into your head and you think, yeah, okay, this is the one I'm going to go with. I want you to consider, just like the swan analogy that we were using and colleagues were talking about in the chat box, are we allowed to be fearful as a leader? And if people want to come in on that one, I think this is a good one to explore. So please feel free to come onto the chat and think whether we are or we're not, and possibly a reason as to why you feel that way. But I'm just going to share with you an idea that I found it very difficult to be fearful as a leader, to allow that vulnerability to be demonstrated and to be shown to governors, to staff, to parents. I found it a real challenge to get to the point where I could openly recognize feeling fearful. And I think the only time that I really managed it was being fearful of the expectations of Ofsted and whether we could measure that, whether we could achieve that. But actually the reaction to that opportunity to articulate my fear of it as a process, as an evaluation, as an inspection, really got people to rally round. And it was a really hugely positive, cathartic moment in terms of their reaction to my fear as a leader around Ofsted. They shared that fear, so there was a sense of empathy, but there was also a sense of desiring to work together against that fear. And actually, it turned out to not needing fear as a result of it, but that's another story for another time. And this is about your fear. But how do you placate yourself when you're feeling fearful? I know for certain that I have ways of placating my fear. It's, for me, sharing that burden. But that's me, and I want you to consider you. And then what would you have done differently if you turned back the clocks? Wonderful. Thank you, colleagues, for those who've come into the chat box. I think that's fantastic. Thank you. So we can appear vulnerable, but we need to be cautious in appearing fearful, as emotions are contagious and can easily destabilize school. Thank you, colleague. Firstly, I absolutely agree that emotions are contagious. And there are a number of people claiming to the poem of contagious, we can catch them like the flu. I started smiling and then you started smiling too, or something along those lines. I can't remember the poem, but they are contagious, like a ripple effect that comes through. But I agree that we shouldn't always appear vulnerable or cautious or fearful. I agree. What I think I'm trying to say is that there are moments when we should, to show our vulnerability, to show our humanity, and I think that we would be surprised if we allowed ourselves to show that. Another comment here, I think fear is a part of growth. That's nice. I really like that. You're stepping out of your comfort zone, and that can be a good thing and bring change. That's really interesting. I think it's a graduated approach, isn't it? I think being out of our comfort zone is fine, isn't it? And one of my books is about risk, and I think we're kind of talking about that here. And we were talking about, or I articulated the idea of risk being calibrated depending on how well you are feeling in yourself. And what some person could call risky isn't risky for you because you're in psychologically a good place, and therefore you can just move on from that. But I think that moving too fast out of our comfort zone or stretching ourselves when we're feeling vulnerable already can be the challenge. But thank you, colleague. That's a really interesting experience. And being an LA head of a school in crisis, yes, absolutely, that would colour your view, because you were feeling vulnerable, particularly in that situation, and people were potentially looking for you for strength. So I would guess, colleague, that as a result of that, you were having to top yourself up quite significantly in order to have the energy to help others. Oh, I love the idea of choosing your attitude. But I think that I may be wrong, but I think that we're going to come on to this in a moment about choosing our attitude. I do think there is a filter. And I think that filter can allow us to help us to choose our attitude. If we're in a good place, if we're looking after ourselves, we're much more likely to be able to choose our attitude, as you say, but because we're in control of it. We're in control of that situation. Being fearful and recognizing that in yourself, can you help to understand support staff who are falling apart too? I agree with that, colleague, about supporting others. I also think there's a personal responsibility to keep themselves safe, and it's not for us to resolve and carry others' burdens all of the time. I can understand us wanting to try and do that, but I think sometimes we need to recognize that we're not the best person to do that, and that we need to pass them on to someone who needs that support or needs that recognition at times. I was working in a church school, and I found the vicar was very helpful in sharing some of that bigger psychological burden that people were carrying that I didn't have the time to unpick and to share and to cope with. It wasn't that I didn't want to recognize it. It was just that I wasn't able to give it the time that it deserved. And sometimes that's an important element to consider. Wow, we're really thinking about this. This is great, and it's good that the chat box is flowing through. So thank you to colleagues who have taken that time. And I just want to end this section, and I do want to end it, is professional joy. Professional joy. Recognizing the joy of leadership too. Before we came on air, I was talking with my NHS colleague and talking about the idea of recognizing joy, holding on to joy, holding on to those wonderful moments. I know for myself, that I used to love going into a classroom after a governor's meeting, because you could always find that kid who's got the joie de vivre, can't you? You can always find that kid. And these kids are wonderful, aren't they? There's always one kid that's got joy oozing from every limb of their body. And these are this is professional joy for me. I think it's really important that we have that. But recognize now, folks, a moment of recent professional joy. When did you just give that pat on the back to yourself? It sometimes feels uncomfortable when we do that. We don't give it the airtime. We don't recognize it. We feel guilty to doing it. We say, oh, but it could have been better. When was the last time you gave yourself a rightful pat on the back? And then importantly, turning it into an action. How can you build joyful moments into your school day? Excuse me. How can you build joyful moments into your school day? I regularly check in on myself. I regularly check in on my emotion. I regularly think, how am I doing? How am I doing? I have a conversation with myself in some respect, and that can be quite useful. I'm not going to go into great detail on this slide, but purely just to say, I like the idea of set point, that we have kind of a balance, and we need to keep ourselves in some form of balance. And that is described by John Ratley here as our set point, and that we all have them. And regardless of what the turbulence is, in regards to that imbalance, recognizing that balance and getting ourselves back to balance, I think is important. I think that's a lovely idea. Thank you, colleague, that came on the chat box there. Sometimes the joyful moments can be the little things, but little things add up to big things. And I started to realize that adding up the small things could get me to a really good place. And I quite like that. So thank you for raising that idea. I also want to raise the idea that it's a more nuanced than kind of extremes of one or the other, or just 5. 5 times 5 is 25, and we have at least 25 other feelings and emotions that come into our world, come into our bodies, come into our heads. And again, using this lovely idea of inside out to just share those with you. Well, inevitably, you felt many of them. Inevitably, you felt most of them. But I think a more nuanced vocabulary around how we're feeling can help us to move away from the extremes and shifting from one to the other, flick-flacking between it's all brilliant, oh no it's not, it's all terrible. But there's a nuance around the balancing up of our scales of how we are feeling. And if we have more vocabulary to able to articulate those feelings, then I think that can be a really positive thing for us to have, because it allows us to feel authentic about the way we're describing it to ourselves, and that can be calming on our minds. One of our colleagues has already talked about kind of the filter and choosing our attitude. And I think that's a lovely phrase. And this is echoed by a man called Viktor Frankl, who wrote a book about man's search for humanity. And within that book, he said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and freedom, which goes back to what another colleague was saying about growth and freedom in terms of when we're recognizing our emotions. So what is this space that Viktor Frankl is talking about? And how can we, I think, increase that space or recognize that this space exists and then give ourselves the best opportunity to react well to situations that we find ourselves in? Now, Doodle Wellness has come up with a lovely kind of timeline of the difference between a reaction and a response. And essentially the difference between the two, folks, is time. Trigger to reaction is unwanted outcomes, because we're potentially not in charge of that. Our chimp or our animal brain is in charge of that, and that can be challenging for us. But a response is a much more considered approach. These are the moments where we can take a little bit of time, give ourselves that gap between the information coming in and how we respond to that information. This idea is taken further forwards with the idea of Steve Peters and the idea that we have a chimp inside of our brain. He was working with Olympians and Paralympians, and he saw the difference between winning and losing was here. What was going on in our minds, or the minds of Sir Chris Hoy and Victoria Pendleton and all of those cyclists who did so well. So the idea that we've got a chimp in our brain, a pet to look after, I like to see it as, and that is basic needs, just like a pet. So when we've got our kind of placated, cute little chimp, everything's fine, everything's good, emotionally, we're in a good place. But very quickly, that chimp can turn into a very angry chimp. And when I was head teacher and I shared my office with my deputy, we talked about chimpy emails. You've all received chimpy emails, angry emails, sent in the moment, sent when the fear and anger is swelling in our systems, swelling in our bodies, and it boom, all of that emotion and anger and energy and anxiety comes into and through this email. But when we're attacked, when our chimp is feeling attacked, this goes back to psychological safety, that we want to attack back. And our initial reaction is to attack back. So I always used to temper my emails by saying to my deputy, how chimpy is my response? And that became a little phrase, how chimpy was my response. But actually it was a useful mechanism for placating my chimp first, recognizing the emotion that that this email was stimulating, or my meeting with my governors, or my meeting with a member of staff, or my interaction with a pupil, recognize how that was making me feel, getting myself into a good place first, and then responding. And I think that can be quite challenging as leaders, where time is precious. We are expected, or we expect of ourselves, to react immediately to these scenarios and these situations. And actually that can be really damaging. We can cause a lot of negative effects as a result of moving in this way. And actually what they're saying is it's quite easy to act differently. Taking a deep breath, a nice simple idea, but actually putting it into practice is more than just simplicity personified. Resisting the act to act impulsively is easy to say, difficult to do. Name how you feel. We've talked about the articulation of that. Playing the power card can be quite tempting, can't it? When we're head teachers and we've got that card to play, playing that power card, belittling somebody or forcing your power upon them verbally or psychologically can be very tempting at times to do. But I always used to think that thinking through the consequences of the aftermath of that reaction was always a good way of tempering how I was going to react to that situation. But hopefully they're all worthy of your time to think about it. Steve Peters then gives us some more top tips, and you can read these for yourselves. I'll just read the titles, but whilst I'm reading the titles, you can read beyond that if you wish, or reflect back on it in your own time. But he's saying, don't fight the chimp, nurture it. And he's right. I nurture my chimp. I feed it, I water it, I care for it, I love it, I talk to it, I reassure it. It being my brain, it being my thoughts and my thinking. And nurturing it, it goes back to proactively doing that, proactively nurturing the ideas that are going on in my head. Basic needs of a pet. We are an animal with a human overlay, not a human with an animal overlay. And we need to recognize that. Allow your chimp to speak its mind. That goes back to recognizing the emotion. If the chimp is saying it's angry, you need to acknowledge that the chimp is angry. But then your job is to nurture that back to a sense of psychological safety, to calm. And you know yourself best as to how you achieve that. But be careful who the chimp talks to. Okay, sometimes we can spurt it out to the wrong person and make the situation a different situation, an unconnected situation, worse. And again, when we're in a good mental state, we can find the right person at the right time in the right place. And if we can do that, what that enables us to do is to not put any pressure on any one person, but also to get very quickly the responses that we need and the systems that we have in place. Go over things a few times, pre-think them. That's what Steve Peters' his great mantra was. Pre-think what we're doing. Try not to be reactive, try to be proactive. Pre-think how you're going to feel in the situation, as well as what you're going to do or say in the situation. So if I knew I was going to be an angry parent, I needed to manage my emotions, and I needed to manage their emotions by accepting and recognizing how they felt, and then also recognizing how that was making me feel or would make me feel, so that I could counteract these feelings and these emotions in order to actually deal with what was on offer once we got over and through those emotions. Get your self-esteem from who you are, not what you do. And I think that can be easier said than done in headship. Interestingly, he talks about 10 minutes a day reflecting on whether you are meeting your values. This goes back, I think, I don't know if you agree, come onto the chat box if you do or you don't, and we can interact in that way. But I think there's an authenticity to your values, gives you purpose, gives you strength, tops you up in terms of your well-being if you do live by your values. And when we feel we let ourselves down is when we're not true to our values. And I think that authenticity is something that we can sometimes misalign or misplace or not recognize and manage and deal with. Where I would challenge Steve on this is that although 10 minutes every day would be lovely and a very, very good starting point, I personally find it much easier and much better to recognize it during the day. Actually, it percolates, not percolates. Yes, I suppose it percolates and punctuates my day. But if you check in on yourself regularly, then you're much less likely to get to anger with a capital A. You're much more likely to catch yourself early. I love the idea of take your chimp for a walk every day, so we get a bit physical going on, and ask him what he's trying to tell you. Let's use that as our new mantra, colleagues. Smile and show the chimp who's boss, but also relax that chimp. Smiling can relax you, and smiling can relax others around you, as long as that smile is genuine and authentic, not false and inauthentic. Do what works for you. I can give you all the tips and tricks that work for me, but that might not mean that they work for you. I've done the research, I've done the thinking, I've done the reading for you. All of these things are authentically offered to you as tried and tested, but you've got to find your own path with your own chimp in your own scenario and your own system. And there's just a summary for you, colleagues, for you to think about, consider, screenshot, deal with, manage in your own way. And I'll leave that unto you. So how can we get to self-compassion? Well, Christian Neff has done some good work about self-compassion and trying to justify how and why we can do that, why we can do it. She talks about self-kindness. And I like the idea that we can aim to be as caring towards ourselves as we are towards others. We are a compassionate profession, yes. I don't tend to think that we are as compassionate to ourselves as we are to our staff and to our pupils. And from my own experience as head chip, I always felt that I had to be there for everybody else. I failed to recognize that that also encompassed me, and that I needed to look after myself in order to be able to care for others. It's a shared common experience of being human. It is not we are not alone, we are not on our own, and the moments of connection with others can allow us to consider and to empathize of this shared human experience and the gamut of emotions that come with that humanity, humanness. And I think there's a sense of being in the moment, and hopefully you're getting yourself lost in the moment of this webinar and really genuinely giving yourself the time to be here now, thinking of you, here now thinking of your feelings, rather than what could happen, what might happen before or after, but now. And sometimes I think, as we talked about in a previous webinar, zooming in on finite details or zooming in on a situation can sometimes be really good, focusing in on ourselves and then zooming out to see a bigger picture of how we're going and what we're doing. The Christian Neff there is offering us a raft of different things that we can help. It's possibly worth thinking about what's the difference between a mood, a feeling, and an emotion. What do you think the difference is between the three of those? Well, the simple answer is purely time. And we've talked about that in terms of a reaction and a response. And maybe these are two words that you can kind of develop. Time allows the human brain to override the chimp brain. The chimp is going to get it first, regardless of what we do, regardless of how we think. The chimp is going to get it first. But if we have looked after ourselves, if we've nurtured that chimp, if we've placated that chimp, then we're much more likely to catch the chimp before it goes boom and creates that psychological, physical carnage that comes because it's so volatile and can react negatively. And then all of the kind of reparation that comes around that can take so much longer than it would have done if we'd previously looked after ourselves and nurtured ourselves. And if you don't believe me, believe Steve Peters again, who basically is saying, don't forget, neglect yourself. Yet I know that some of you will still do that, or you have previously done that. But hopefully you're starting to recognize, or you're starting to believe, either me or Steve or a combination of the both, that it is important. I don't believe we forget to look after ourselves. I think we give ourselves the excuse to not look after ourselves because we believe that others are more important. We feel guilty when we do. We feel that we're superhuman. We feel that we can override it. We feel all sorts of different things. So I don't think that we forget it. But what I'm hoping you're getting to is the idea that we need to recognize it and we need to deal with it. We need to recognize when we need help, and we need to look to others to help us in those moments, whether that be partner, family, friend, member, colleague. We need to have those people around us in order to help us through this common humanity experience. Not to always talk about the negatives, because people don't want the dementor sitting next to them. What they want is a balanced view. So do offer the successes and the joy of headship with colleagues, as well as the moments of challenge. So for every action, there is a reaction. Just be careful what your reaction is. And importantly, how are we going to achieve psychological safety? How are we going to feel, or how are we going to get to the point where the chimp is feeling safe and placated? How can we do this? How can we achieve this? How can we get to this important place of psychological safety? Well, you can have an opportunity to come on the chat box and tell me how you find psychological safety. Firstly, look to the bottom right of my screen. I found a new word to describe the light filtering through trees. I was doing a science lecture yesterday at university, and I was talking about how cathartic it can be to see these rays coming through. And I've now found out that it's got a word attached to it. I'm not 100% sure that my pronunciation of it is going to be right, but comorbi or something along those lines is a lovely phrase. Because for me, connecting with nature, connecting with people, and meeting with friends is where I find psychological safety. My mind of worrying slows. My chimp can relax into it and enjoy being with others, being in nature, and meeting with friends. But colleagues, come onto the chat box and share with me other things that allow you to find psychological safety. Because again, it's not just about me. You're all gone shy on me. Thank you. Daily walks, lovely. Talking things through with your sister. Sitting in a quiet place. Hard to find, aren't they, colleagues? Quiet places are hard to find. Because even if we close the door of our office, that quiet place is still not quiet, is it? Because notifications, ping, 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 ping. Yeah. Favorite photo is a screensaver. Nice. I like that. Laughter. Yeah. I think laughter is underrated as a concept. Going to comedy and laughing, it's really cathartic, isn't it? I think it's really important that we tap into that. Thank you. Listening to music it can really change our emotions, can't it? It can give us a different heartbeat when we're listening to calm music, or it can really invigorate us when we need confidence and bravery to move forwards. And some songs can do that for us. Or birdsong, like our colleague is saying there, can be really helpful and supportive in those moments. Nature is generally the answer. Other people, generally the answer, but I think you've nailed it. But what I would say is you've nailed it in theory. What we've now got to do is nail it in practice. Sorry, I've clicked on one too many slides. Just one last idea that I just want to share with you, colleagues, before we finish on time, as I wanted to, because I recognize and appreciate your time, is the idea that even Formula One cars stop in order to go faster. Even the fastest cars that they are racing with have to stop in order to go faster. They have to check in on the tires and the petrol and the other things that are going on. They have to regulate that. They have to change things that need changing. They have to sense things that need sensing. We do too. We need to stop. We need to pause. We need to check in on our emotional safety, our psychological safety, our emotional well-being more than we do. And hopefully something that I've said today will resonate with you, colleagues, and take emotional well-being beyond something that we say we should do onto something that we are going to do today, tomorrow, and in the lead up to the next webinar when we'll explore something else. I hope that that's been useful to you, colleagues. I hope that you feel that it's a valuable use of your time. That was certainly my intention. If you want to connect with me further, then please do so through the contact details on that final slide. And I would very much welcome those interactions with you. But for now, good luck on your resilience journey. I wish you well on your well-being journey. Recognize it and act on it, colleagues, and then you'll be in a much better place as a result. Thank you.
David, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm sure, like everyone else, I could have listened to you all day, all really valuable. And I hope we put some of that into action, like you say, actually do it rather than just think about it. But thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning.
Absolutely.
I hope you feel that's been valuable as well. And thank you for all your interaction in the chat as well. As mentioned, I will email your follow-up link, so do please revisit, send it to colleagues that may appreciate it as well. And we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, David.
Thank you.